Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the Exploring Bias series. This series aims to look at the multifaceted concept of bias from different perspectives. Please follow us on Instagram at respond.to.it or email us at the respondtoitproject@gmail.com for more information regarding our efforts. Our second speaker in this series is Suraj Parekh, a national level debater. He is extremely passionate about societal issues and politics. Today, his speech will be titled Systemic Class Bias in America. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's see what he has to say.
Hey, I'm Suraj. I'm a senior at Granite Bay High School, and today I'm going to talk about class bias, systemic class bias in America. So we should start by defining what exactly systemic class bias is. And it is how the institutions of this country have been rigged in a way that benefits the upper class, the wealthy, the ruling elites, the millionaires, the billionaires, the 1%, whatever you want to call them, against the middle and working classes of this country. So the 99%, ordinary people. And if you look at every major institution in America, they have been crafted in such a way to specifically help the upper class and the elites and the ultra rich people while hurting ordinary people across the nation. And that is really what systemic class bias in America is. The main way it expresses itself is through governmental policy and through non-governmental policy. And we'll look at both of those today, both bias within the government and bias outside the government. And after that, we can see how exactly we can combat this class bias in America. So let's start with governmental policy. I could go on and on about how government policy has totally failed working in middle-class Americans in really every realm of policy, whether it's healthcare, climate change, wages, education, labor, etc. The entire economy is rigged in a way that is beneficial to the upper class and harmful to ordinary people. But I think if I had to look at one statistic that really sums up all of this bad, biased government policy, it would be a study from the Rand Corporation that came out in 2020. And what it shows is that from 1975 to 2018, the combination of a variety of government policies and responses to various economic crises, so healthcare costs, wage policy, education, corporate bailouts after 2008, all of this has led to the top 1% stealing $50 trillion from the bottom 90% of Americans. Again, that's over around 50-year period. The top 1% took $50 trillion from the bottom 90% of Americans, which is a massive, massive amount of money that has been transferred to the top 1%. So because of government policy, because of things like corruption, because of the fact that the people who are in Congress are most often from these elite circles, from the upper classes of society, they write policy in a way that helps corporations, that helps their donors, that helps their own social circles, that helps the other wealthy people. And that has all led to this massive wealth transfer of $50 trillion collectively from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. This is systemic bias at its worst. It's where the government, which is supposed to represent the people, who are supposed to be elected by the people, is actually doing the bidding of wealthy campaign donors, of corporate interests, of other wealthy people who members of Congress are friends with, of lobbyists, etc. And all of this is coming at the expense of regular Americans. The second main way where we see bias perpetuated is in non-governmental institutions. And the two I'm going to really focus on today is in the media and in corporate structures. So looking at the media first, it is really the most influential non-governmental institution, but it just acts as a tool to perpetuate this anti-working and anti-middle class bias. So for example, during the 2020 election, the media's coverage of the primaries was incredibly skewed. And you saw these corporate media outlets like CNN, MSNBC, Fox, and more giving this fawning coverage to people like Trump, people like Pete Buttigieg, and other so-called moderate or centrist candidates who in reality are just advocating for the continuation of the status quo class bias. And they viciously attacked people like Bernie Sanders, like Andrew Yang, and any other candidate that had a even mildly pro-worker or anti-establishment platform. And there was actually a statistical analysis done of MSNBC by In These Times. And what it found is that MSNBC, which is the supposedly liberal or progressive network, found that compared to Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders received less coverage despite polling ahead of Warren and equal to Biden. Sanders was also the most likely to get negative coverage and the least likely to get positive coverage on MSNBC. So what this was a concentrated war on the most pro-worker candidate running in the 2020 election by the so-called progressive network. And this is, again, just a very clear example about how corporate media is massively biased against the interests of ordinary Americans, because they did whatever they can to take down the one candidate who had policies like Medicare for all, like a Green New Deal, like free college, like labor unions that would actually help regular people. Since then, corporate media has also been working in overtime to pit ordinary people against each other along these vague cultural lines. So this is things like Rachel Maddow just smearing everyone she disagrees with as a Russian asset, or on CNN, where they cover January 6th like a Hollywood event, like it's the worst thing that ever happened in US history. Was it bad? Yes, but they cover it in a very over dramatized way. Or look at Tucker Carlson on Fox, vilifying immigrants and people of color. And all of this is an example of corporate media outlets trying to split people apart along arbitrary lines and stop real class solidarity, because they know that if you have the 99%, the mass of Americans divided along, Russia and January 6th and immigrants and all these different cultural lines, then there is no way that they at the top of the pyramid will lose their power. And again, the reason they do this is because corporations and media are at the top of the pyramid. 6 corporations control 90% of America's media consumption. So again, that's 6 corporations. They control 90% of the media that is consumed by Americans. That is the main reason why they do this, because the media is just a mouthpiece for corporate America, for their actual official owners, and they will simply repeat those talking points to ensure the corporations have their power. There's also the implicit class bias that exists there, because the people who are hosting these news shows on MSNBC and Fox and CNN are all multimillionaire elitists. So they like to lecture us from their ivory towers, but in reality, they don't have the interests of ordinary Americans in mind. The second place where we see class bias in non-governmental institutions is in corporate structures. So I'm going to focus specifically on Amazon, because I think as the second largest employer in America and as a very notable company, it can show relevance about overall corporate culture in America. So a New York Times investigation found just last month that Amazon, which, as I said earlier, is the second largest employer in America, has totally killed social mobility for its employees. So Amazon executives, and I'm quoting here from the article, intentionally limit upward mobility for hourly workers, end quote. And they almost entirely block out blue-collar warehouse workers from getting promoted to more managerial and white-collar jobs. So again, Amazon executives, according to this New York Times report, are intentionally limiting upward mobility for hourly workers. They're intentionally blocking ordinary warehouse workers from moving into the managerial positions. This is something that is completely unacceptable, because there's no way for ordinary workers, people who work in the warehouses, people who work as delivery drivers, to move up on the social pyramid, because Amazon, their employer, is blocking them out of that position. They have created this barrier there. And this is not unique to Amazon. Most large American corporations will enforce this divide of the owner class and the manager class, the people who run companies, the CEOs, the executives, the store managers, and against the worker class, which is the people who actually do the work that makes the company run, the people who deliver packages, or in other companies, they make cars, they write code, they treat patients, they serve customers, or whatever that business does. Every American corporation tries to enforce this division. And the structure of corporate America is biased because one of these classes, this owner class, this managerial class, is effectively a dictatorship that has all of this power, but doesn't actually contribute anything to the company. You have people like Jeff Bezos and Amazon, other high-level executives at the company. They have all of this power and all of this wealth, but the only thing they're really doing for the company is enforcing the existing class structure, which keeps their power intact. But they're not actually helping ordinary people, workers at the company, or helping society as a whole progress. The other class, the workers, exist at their mercy, even though in reality, Jeff Bezos isn't the one who's driving the delivery trucks. He's not the one who's shipping packages. It's the workers at Amazon. They're the ones who keep the company running, yet they are blocked out from even having the slightest bit of mobility or power. Our country is simply rigged in every way possible against working and middle class people. This is in the corporate structure in the media as well. So what's the solution to this? Well, there are a lot of different problems, and there's a lot of different solutions as well. On the governmental side, things like Medicare for all to deal with healthcare, things like a Green New Deal, deal with climate change, a much, much higher minimum wage, free public college, the PRO Act and other labor rights expansions to help unions. All of these are needed on the governmental side. And on the non-governmental side, the entire system needs to be reworked. Corporate media companies have to be broken up. The people who host these shows have to be replaced. And really every large business in America has to be completely reorganized, because every institution has this owner-worker hierarchy that exists that creates a bias that prevents ordinary people from getting up, from getting the American dream, from achieving a better life. So if we're looking for the most broad and effective solution to all of these problems, it has to be the creation of a multiracial working class movement. And to really see how this works, we can take the lessons from history. Just to quickly go over them, we can look at the progressive movement in the 1900s, the early 1900s, where old school unions like the Industrial Workers of the World did something that was at the time very radical. They had one singular integrated union, so integrated across race, across gender, across nationality, religion, which was very radical for the early 1900s. And this is the 1900s, 1910s. And they were often accused of using militant tactics, but they used their labor power in order to really push workers in the right direction. So the labor power of the IWW, combined with the political radicalism of a lot of people on the left at the time, forced the American political class to pass policies that helped the working and middle class. We saw with people like President Teddy Roosevelt during that time, President Taft, et cetera. They united urban workers and rural farmers who would traditionally be considered as having opposing interests. We can also look to the New Deal movement, which came just 2 decades later, where more radical unions like the CIO inherited the legacy of the IWW. And these political parties that were pushing for change were very strong. Even inside the Democratic Party, there was division. There was people like Huey Long pushing people like President Roosevelt to pass a more aggressive New Deal. And once again, they united urban workers and rural farmers, and again broke barriers in gender and racial inequality, or gender and racial organizations. And you can look again at the 1960s with the war on poverty, and you saw how radicals like Malcolm X and moderates like MLK were allies in the civil rights movement. You have organizations like the Poor People's Campaign, which was critical in passing not just the Civil Rights Act in 1964, but also making sure that we have reforms, which President Johnson did sign, like Medicare, like the war on poverty, et cetera. So you had all of these different factors. You had different groups coming together to unite, regardless of where they were from. Because remember, all of these groups, what they had in common, all these movements, is that they didn't divide people in rural areas, rural farmers and urban workers, because they realized that those two groups of people, which at the time were the main cultural divisions in society, had the same class interests. And they were able to combat the class bias in that way. So what can you personally do? Well, you can organize with political groups like Democratic Socialists of America, like Sunrise Movement, or even local activism organizations. You can support candidates who will actually work to fix government and make it work for ordinary Americans across this country. And really in your personal lives, you can have conversations about politics through a cooperative rather than an adversarial lens, right? So instead of viewing someone of the opposite party, let's say they support Donald Trump or they support Joe Biden, instead of seeing them as an enemy, see them as a friend who, even though they may disagree on the labeling, on what color team they're on, whether they're red or blue, they have the same fundamental class interest of you. Both of you are oppressed in the same way. Both of you have to deal with healthcare and education costs and low wages and not enough paid time off, et cetera. And you have the same class interest. So focus on where you agree, focus on where you can unite to build a better future for all of us. So that's really a breakdown of systemic class bias in America. And ultimately, the solution is unifying the middle and the working class, the 99%, against the 1%, the millionaires, the billionaires, and the ruling elites. And together, if we do that, we really can make America a country where we can achieve our dreams and where we can have a system that works for everyone. Thank you.